Judge Carter.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the desk of Mark Carter 1.
Clerk will read.
Amendment offered by Mr. Carter, page 58.
Unanimous consent.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment prohibits the Department of Justice from using funds to implement a regulation and guidance that will require every public pool and spa in America to have a permanent, and I emphasize the word permanent, pool lift. This would not only affect hotels and resorts, but governmental entities such as municipal pools around the country. Let's be clear, I'm not against having access to swimming by disabled persons, and I think we can do this using common sense. But the position that the Justice Department is taking is far from common sense. Over the past year, hotel owners and city managers have asked Justice to clarify the accessible means of entry to pools and spas. This past January, note that time, January, the Justice Department responded to this request by issuing revised guidance standards, and these things are alarming to say the least. Revised standards would require that they have a portable pool lift only in very narrow circumstances, and states that they must have a permanent pool lift at every pool and every spa. And I just imagine a hotel for just a moment that has 2 hot tubs and a pool. Under Justice's guidance that they've given to the hotel owners, that will require 3 permanently affixed pool lifts at that location. This doesn't make sense. We're talking about 309,000 pools that will be affected by this ruling of justice. Okay, that's a lot of swimming pools and a lot of spas. And at locations where there are multiple pools and spas, 3 permanently affixed lifts. But 1 portable lift would serve all 3. And this is really a common sense issue. Now, the cost of these things is important. They range from $2,500 to $9,700. Cost of installation can range from $500 to $3,000 in California. If a hotel owner with a small pool and hot tub in California needs to install 2 permanent lifts, 1 for each body of water, the cost of purchasing and installing 2 lifts would range from $11,000 to $25,400. This is pretty outrageous when those 2 pool bodies of water could be served by a portable lift. I have attached an affidavit from a pool owner in Austin, Texas, Mr. H.P. Patel. Mr. Patel, under an ordinance, a city ordinance, which has since been done away with by the city of Austin, he built a pool lift in his pool. His affidavit says for the 12 years he's had that pool lift in his motel, there's never been 1 person to request the use of that pool lift in that whole 12-year period. And to his knowledge, there is no hotel owner that's a member of the association in Austin that has ever had anyone request the use of their pool lifts that were required by the ordinance set up by Austin. Austin has since done away with that ordinance. Now, the other thing is this requirement, according to justice, has to be met by the 15th day of May. In 6 weeks, approximately 309,000 pools and spas have to have this done. And yet manufacturers can produce between 2,500 to 5,000 lifts a month. So it's virtually impossible for the guidance and requirements of the Justice Department to be met by the drop-dead date that they've given us. So there's just no common sense reason for us to do this. This would delay the issuance of this guidance and the implementation of this guidance and direction of this
We're Googling
requirement.
We'll Google
so
it.
that we will have a chance, because we have actually in this Congress and the authorizing committee, a Pool Safe Act is being brought up at this time.
I don't know.
This would delay this justice requirement until we can get common sense back into the program. And you know, I'm joined by this one with Mr. Nunnelee and Mr. Flake, who joined me in concern over this massive expense, and I would request that this committee grant this amendment.
It's not an earmark. Trust me.
You already heard that.
I like
that. Thank you. Let me thank Judge Carter for his amendment, but I rise to oppose it. And I may not be able to check into any hotel in the country after this, but I want to add that there are people who join me in opposition. The American GI Forum, the Blinded Veterans Association, the Disabled American Veterans, the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, the Jewish war veterans. I could go on. But I want to just say that the Paralyzed Veterans of America says that in their letter, they go through in great detail that, first of all, the ADA was passed into law 20 years ago. This particular set of regulations were developed in 2004. They've been through an extensive process, including the final regulations. This is not something that someone in the hospitality industry is being surprised with at this moment in time. This has been, as in everything in government, has been through a long, extensive, transparent, public process to lead to the point where we want to include the access for people who are disabled and where there are new pools being built or where there are existing pools that can be adjusted through this lift process. And the judge mentioned, the congressman mentioned that there's a cost to this. There's a cost to our country by isolating people who are disabled, and that's why the Congress 20 years ago passed the American with Disabilities Act. And there's nothing that we should do today in this appropriations bill to restrict these regulations from going into place when they've been developed from 2004 all the way to now. It's not a surprise. It's the right thing to do, and I have to ask that my colleagues oppose this amendment and join with every single one of these veterans groups who have submitted these letters to the committee. Thank you.
Yield?
I'd be glad to yield.
Good, and I thank you for your comments. And it is true that the American Disabilities Act was passed a long time ago, but this particular requirement for a permanent fix came out by the Justice Department rule in 2010, adopting updated standards for accessible design and to replace the 1991 standards. These updated standards included requirements for pools to make and spas to make it accessible for guests with disabilities. The deadline for compliance being March the 15th, 2012. So this particular situation is a much more current situation under the ADA than 20 years ago. There was just a mention of making them accessible. This is how to make them accessible. And my issue is really, I don't want to make it inaccessible for people to use these pools and spas. I just think it makes common sense to not require a permanently affixed at every location. When some places, you go to Las Vegas, there may be 15 pools and 20 spas in one location, and you would have to fix one at every one of those when you could do it with a common sense use of portable lifts to get people in the pool when they're requested. It's just to allow us to make some sense out of this rather than to require to have a permanently affixed one at the spa over there and one over here on the pool. It's just common sense that we can do it better. And Justice made they made emphasis on the word permanent. And that's really what I'm trying to get this to a place where we can make common sense.
I understand. We all have to make a choice on this, and I appreciate the fact that the amendment's been brought forward. I stand on the side of the paralyzed veterans and the Blind Veterans Association and all of the others that I mentioned who have submitted these letters. And I think that the right course of action is to err towards the side of inclusion rather than exclusion. That's what the ADA is all about. And this is a process that has led us to this moment, and I would hope that the committee would reject this amendment.
Mr. Honda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the problems we face is that it's an either-or. And I think that administratively, they made a decision and used wording that has an effect of permanency and with a lot less flexibility for each situation. I'm not unaware of what Judge Carter is talking about. I think he's correct. However, I think the wording of the amendment talks about absolute cutting of funding, and I think that what we it seems to me that we should have a process here where we can hold off the permanence of the execution of the ruling administratively and let the policymakers sit down and do what we're supposed to do and hammer out a process where it's going to be fair to the business community, but also addressing the needs of the disabled.
Would the gentleman yield for a second?
Let me just finish this piece, okay, and then I'll yield to you, Mr. Fattah. And I think that no one wants to be caught between the jaws of friends of our business and our military veterans who are permanently paralyzed. The issue is not making choices between the two. I think the issue for us is hammering out a reasonable administrative direction or a policy that would take care of the issue. And I think that it's time where we take in the folks who are going to be affected and bring them together and hammer out an agreement. I'm hoping that there is a process for that, and I think that the using the word common sense approach to a very thorny problem, and not a new problem, but a problem that seems to expand into new fields. And if we apply old rulings to new issues, then we're going to get into problems. So I'm hoping that we find a middle ground where we can address both issues, and I'll yield to.
I just want the committee to be aware that there was a process. It's been going on for years. There's a tax credit for this. There's a financial distress exemption. If you can't afford to do it, you don't have to do it. But for those hotels and for those entities that can afford to do it, they have to do it under these regulations, and they can have a tax credit for doing it. So that's what is in place now. I think it's the right way to go, and it's been 12 years in the making.
Mr. Chairman?
I'll yield.
First, I want to reemphasize the fact that the Justice Department made new rulings on 2010, but also I have this affidavit from Mr. Patel when the city of Austin had this very ordinance, which allowed portable lifts. He just wants to point out that the uses that have been made of his lift, and by checking with his association, every lift in Austin has never been used. But that's immaterial. We still don't grant the access, and I'm for granting the access with common sense. Also, a request has been made of Justice since they came out with this rule in January of this year, saying you have to comply by May 15th of this year, when there are 309,000 pools that have to comply, and they can only do 5,000 at a maximum pool lift manufacturers a month. It's impossible to comply with, and both industry and municipal pools, and I'll point out the city of Stephenville, which is in my district, contacted Justice and said we have a zero-step entry to our pool, which means there's no step to get into the pool. It's an inch deep at the shallowest end, and it slopes down. But they said, we have this pool, can we get some exception to use a portable lift? And they could not get a response from Justice, and Justice has ignored the pool owners at every level, and we're just trying to get their attention and let this Congress set the standard of a portable lift be used in one location for multiple bodies of water.
Reclaim my time. I'm not even sure that the answer is permanent or portable. I think that the issue is, can each business entity work with the Department of Justice or whomever is working with them to come up with the appropriate solution for their situation? And one size fits all does not make any sense to me. And I think that we should try to figure out a way where business people can move forward, provide the services that they want to provide.
Chairman Young.
And still address the issue of ADA.
Mr. Chairman, I find this a really important conversation. And I think that the Carter Amendment speaks to a real serious problem. But I also think that we should pay attention to what Mr. Honda is saying. This issue deserves some real consideration. Let me just take a minute and explain. I know something about this. Now, some of you recall that a year and a half ago, I had what was to be a minor back surgery. And then 3 days after the surgery, having been dropped on the floor by an incompetent person, I ended up with 3 additional fractures in my spine. It was quite a long time. I couldn't do much to help myself at all. But I found, and I have found with the military wounded casualties at Bethesda and Walter Reed, and in my own case, oftentimes that getting in the pool is a much better rehabilitation exercise than anything else.
Right.
In fact, there are many cases where that's about the only exercise you could get. That was the only exercise that I could get, and it was very, very helpful. Now, after a while, I was able to get in and out of the pool, but I used a portable, and I used a permanent lift. They both worked fine. So I think that Mr. Honda's onto something, that we better really know for sure what it is that we're doing. There is definitely a need, and I personally can vouch for that, my own experience. But whether we should lock something in right this minute, I'm not sure. I think we better be careful about how we go about this.
Mr. Chairman, if I just may close,
Time of the time expired.
yeah, I think that it's not about who's going to win, who's going to lose. It's about that we come up with the appropriate process.
Mr. Nunnelee.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is not about the Americans with Disability Act. It's not about access. When I was in college, I lost my eyesight. I've had long periods of time in my life I've been blind. I've been denied a job because of my blindness. If this was about access, if this was about denying access, I would be up here doing everything I could to fight against it. If these hotel owners came forward and said, we don't want to have any kind of lift to allow those with disabilities to get in and out of our swimming pools, I'd be doing everything I could to fight against it. What this is about is common sense regulation. These hotel owners are saying, look, we're glad to provide these portable lifts. We can take them, we can keep them where they need to be. They're not going to be installed permanently. When they need to be used, they're there. It's about regulation that was implemented that is removed from those that are actually having to comply with that regulation. That's why I'm going to vote for it.
Mr. Flake.
Chairman.
Mr. Flake.
I stand in support of the amendment. Mr. Nunnelee has it exactly right. This is not an issue of hotels and apartment owners and municipalities trying to get out of have They have come forward and they were led to believe over the past year that the portable lift would be acceptable. And many of them have gone out and purchased portable lifts, only to be told, I think, on January 29th that you've got until March 15th to comply. It's now been extended for another 60 days. The problem with the approach of, well, let's just be deliberate about this, is by May 15th, I believe it is, if this amendment doesn't pass, you'll have lawyers suing resort owners and others for not having these fixed lifts in place. Can you imagine the liability that comes with a fixed lift, with a fixed structure at every pool, every body of water, every jacuzzi? All of us who have children know that they love to climb on them. Things like this, at every body of water, there's no common sense to that at all, none. When a portable lift works fine and the hotels are willing to do it. But the liability that comes with that, and also with a power source near the water, right at the water, for every body of water. There's just no common sense at all to this. And so that is exactly what this amendment is doing, is saying, let's have some common sense. Let's make sure there's accessibility. And I can guarantee you, if this regulation goes into effect, the fixed lift, what it will cause is less accessibility, because resort owners, apartment complexes, municipalities will simply say, we can't deal with the cost and the potential liability. And so we'll just have to shut our pool down. That's what will happen, guaranteed. So this is a common sense amendment. It's trying to ensure that there's access in a common sense way. I commend the gentleman for bringing it forward, and the fact that three of us, Mr. Nunnelee and Mr. Carter and myself, all independently said, let's go after this regulation. It shows that there is a problem here, and I assume that a lot of you have heard about it as well. So I thank the gentleman for offering it, and I urge support for it.
Mr. Pastor?
Well, as you know, representing a state that relies on the hospitality industry, what my colleague has said in terms of the extension has occurred. March 15th was the original day. We notified Justice, and they gave us 60-day extension. And I would tell you that it's not, the argument is not giving access, because we want to give access. The question is, what's the best way to do it? And so the argument in this case can be, if you have a resort that has a number of pools, there's a number of spas, that they could probably accommodate any person who's handicapped, disabled, that wants to use one of the pools, that they could move the portable lift and be able to accommodate them. The question is, as my colleague has pointed out, the permanent structure causes redundancy in a number of pools, as well as maybe in one pool where you have a spa and the pool. And then you worry about the power source because obviously you need power to work these lifts. And so I don't know whether Chairman Wolf and Ranking Member Fatah can be in communication with Justice, because I think there's probably enough concern. And I agree with the Ranking Member Fatah that it is about access, but at the same time, what's a reasonable way of doing it so that people can be accommodated with access at the same time? You don't cause economic injury to an industry that would want to accommodate, but what is the best way to do it, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Bishop?
Let me agree with Mr. Young, Mr. Honda, that this is a conversation that is well worth having. I happen to represent Fort Benning, Georgia, which trains over 100,000 trainees a year with probably 10,000 or so graduations. But there are lots of visitors that come in, and our hotel industry has increased tremendously with the number of new trainees that come into the base. We also have a wounded warrior unit there. And of course, access is something that is very desirable. And of course, our hoteliers would love to provide access because they like serving the veterans community and the military community, and they do that willingly, and it's good for business. But I think that we've got to find a solution. We've got to balance these interests here, and we've got to use common sense. I'm not sure that rushing to a decision by not giving full consideration to the burden that would be placed on these hoteliers is the proper course of action. And so I'm very torn, because I represent veterans and I represent the hoteliers also. I love them both. And I think that we ought to be able to find a way to solve this problem without having to be an either-or choice.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Farr.
Out during the major discussion, but I saw this amendment and I really felt very emotional about it and wanted it. My sister's married to a disabled lawyer, had a childhood accident, and he's totally paralyzed from the waist down. And with him, I've been just exposed to this disability world, and it's an amazing world. First of all, it's got a lot of economy. They go to places where they're accessible. For example, the Four Seasons has an incredible reputation, very expensive hotel chain, but is extremely accessible to people. I represent probably the biggest tourism industry per capita in the United States, the Monterey Bay Area, and very concerned about these issues of trying to take mom and pop hotels, motels, restaurants and convert them. But I also traveled with my brother-in-law. And I'll tell you, it's really difficult when you're calling ahead to try to get a motel to stay in, an inn, and they say, yeah, it's accessible, and you get there and there's nothing accessible. You can't get in. There's no exception to this. This Americans with Disability Act is a civil right in this country. It's not a zoning code. And it seems to me, and particularly I've worked a lot with the veterans who get disabled because of war injuries. And then they're in that field. And I remember talking to Chris Reeves, was Chris Reeves, the actor? His wife was telling me, you know, his chair was totally, his life dependency was in that chair. And he said, we're always getting invited to give speeches, and we call ahead and said, well, is it accessible? And they said, sure, it's accessible. And then we get there, and there's just, and they said, well, it's only one step. One step is a barrier. They can't get the chair over one step. It weighs half a ton. It's, I mean, I just feel that when we as Congress have been so proud of ADA and that we have responsibility for a lot of things, including our United States military, many of whom are losing limbs and are going to be in that community of people that need to get access. We ought not to be denying it. There is no alternative to this. You either have access or you don't.
Mr. Carter's recognized to close.
Amazingly enough, I can associate myself with everyone who's rose to speak here. There's no intent to deny access at any point. This amendment would only prevent the spending of funds by justice on requiring permanent lifts by May the 15th. It has no effect on portable lifts. Portable lifts would be, in fact, we encourage the use of portable lifts to meet the requirements of the American Disabilities Act. So I don't have an argument with anyone. I have 50,000 permanent resident troops in my district at Fort Hood and train hundreds of thousands every year. I've got thousands of wounded warriors in my district. I certainly would not want to deny any of them access to a swimming pool. But the real result is going to be that if we don't stop this permanent requirement by the 15th, the non-compliance is going to be so great that basically swimming is going to be over. And a vast majority of the pools that are for public use on May the 16th, because they're going to close pools to avoid the liability issue that's coming down. And it's just common sense that if it can't be accomplished by the manufacturer and that you can put portable lifts there to accommodate, why we shouldn't hold off, because we have a bill in Congress right now to address this very need with a common sense solution, but it needs to get through the process. I'm only asking to delay the implementation through withholding funds on permanent fixtures so that we can address a common sense solution that we can accommodate all who need that are disabilities.
Would the gentleman
all time has expired on the amendment. All in favor of the Carter Amendment say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No. The ayes seem to have it. The ayes have it and is agreed to. Are there other amendments? Mr. Kingston.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.